Good evening friends, you are most welcome to Think Eyes channel. Today we are going to discuss Mani 003 Comparative Ethnography, in which we are going to discuss Unit 3 Feminist and Postmodernist Approach. Contents are introduction, early influences, the emergence of feminist anthropology, feminist methodology, in which feminism and positivism, feminist and fieldwork, contemporary issues and concerns, development and social change, in which we will discuss motherhood and the body, knowledge and representation, new and emerging issues. Then after we will discuss postmodernism and anthropology, in which some important text, and at the last summary. Learning objectives are after reading this unit, you will be able to understand the impact of feminist and postmodernist thoughts upon the discipline of anthropology, identify the key authors and texts that contributed to feminist anthropology and postmodern anthropology, discuss the strengths and limitations of the feminist and postmodernist approach in anthropology, and identify major areas of inquiry in which anthropologists are currently engaged. Now, let us begin the introduction part. We begin the unit by discussing the evolution of feminist anthropology as a distinct subdiscipline within the field. We then move on to the discussion of the postmodern turn in anthropology and the way in which it redefined the subject matter and methods of understanding of the discipline. Both these perspectives had a key impact upon the manner in which ethnography came to be conducted in contemporary anthropology. The feminist movement and feminist thought have made an extraordinary impact in social sciences and humanities over the past half a century. Feminism, which has its focus the subordination of women by men, has a history of over 2 centuries. Mary Wollstonecraft's pioneering work. Mary Wollstonecraft pioneering work, Vindication of the Rights of Women, is viewed as a fundamental text of first wave of suffragette feminism in Europe, in which women for the first time organized themselves politically, demanding the right to vote. Feminism has been broadly categorized into liberal, Marxist, and socialist feminism, while it is not within the scope of this unit to map the trajectories of these various viewpoints. It may be noted that the underlying core of all these approaches is to bring to the center stage women's experience in all walks of life, from the secluded, secret, private sphere to the more visible public one, while liberal feminism advocates for reforms in the systems and the promotion of practices and policies that will promote gender equality. Marxist and socialist or radical approaches view the system itself as fundamentally flawed and unequal, and therefore advocate radical structural changes and an overhauling of social institutions so that they do not discriminate against women. The so-called second wave of feminism, which began in 1960s and 1970s in the USA and Europe, saw an intense upsurge in feminist mobilizing, activism and writing, including in social sciences. Large number of women entered universities and very soon began to realize that in many areas of social thought, history was either assumed to be male, with women confirmed with women confined to domestic spaces. Large number of women entered universities and very soon began to realize that in many areas of social thought, history was either assumed to be male, with women confined to domestic spaces, or gender issues were simply regarded as unimportant or irrelevant. This androcentric bias was also experienced by students of anthropology, which is itself described as the science of man. Despite the long-standing interest of anthropologists in kinship and family, the focus was the male and issue related to descent, property, political organization based on kinship, etc. Levi-Strauss' alliance theory also views women merely as the conduits or messages exchanged by different groups of men. Even though women anthropologists like Margaret Mead and Ruth Benedict did a great service to the discipline by popularizing it, their work was viewed very condescendingly and critically by dominant men of the British School of Social Anthropology who thought that these works were unscientific, impressionistic, and frivolous. It was observed by feminist scholars that much of the information and ethnographic accounts on the lives and experiences of women were often, in reality, reports of male informants transmitted through male ethnographers. In the 1960s and 1970s, therefore, feminists set out to correct the male bias in societies they studied. They argued that the discipline had been dominated by male researchers and was full of male stereotypes and androcentric frameworks for the analysis of cultures. In the following sections, we map the emergence and growth of feminism or feminist theorizing and methodology within anthropology from the early beginning to the contemporary period. We shall examine some of the crucial methodological and substantive debates that feminist or that feminism endangered and will elaborate some of the areas of inquiry and research in which feminist anthropologists are currently engaged. It will become clear to you that gender, from being a residual or peripheral category, is today regarded as a central fundamental one, without which all endeavors to understand and analyze society and culture will necessarily be incomplete, inadequate, and unidimensional. Gender is now recognized as being central to the analysis of structures of power, the organization of social and cultural institutions, and mode of ideological control across cultures. Early influences. Mapping the growth and trajectory of feminism or feminist anthropology, Alan Levin 2006 traces its root to the work of some brave and pioneering women, many of whom have remained unknown and unrecognized. Prominent amongst them is Elsie Claus Parson, Elsie Claus Parson, 1875 to 1941, a political radical and outspoken feminist who made use of her personal wealth to offer financial support to younger scholars in an era before public funding for field research had been institutionalized. Ruth Benedict was one of the beneficiaries of Parsons' generosity. Parsons completed her doctorate in sociology from Columbia University in 1899 but moved to anthropology under the influence of scholars like Kroeber, Loewy, Sapir, Boas, and others. When she was in her 40s, she traveled with male colleagues to the American Southwest, thus breaking social barriers against men and women working together. Her best known work is Pueblo, Indian Religion, 1939, a descriptive and comparative work whose constant theme is cultural change. Levin 2006 also mentions the contribution of Zora Neale Thurston, an African American woman who studied at Columbia University under French Boas. She experimented with several narrative forms and moved freely between academic and creative writing. Daisy Bates, a little known field worker who for several decades lived near the Australian Aborigine, is said to have provided A.R. Radcliffe Brown with much of the data that he later claimed as his own. Bates never achieved much scholarly recognition, but is chiefly remembered as a woman wronged at the hands of British social anthropology's leading figures. Levin 2006. Within British social anthropology, Falaise Cabari, a student of Malinowski, was recognized as a pioneer of anthropological research on women in a specific social and political context. In 1939, she wrote Aboriginal Women, Sacred and Profane, which examined the rich but separate ritual experiences of Aboriginal women. Women of the Grassfields 1952 is a significant study on women's work and economic life in British Cameroons. This work is a precursor to the vast body of interdisciplinary literature on women and development that followed from the 1970s onwards, which interrogate the nature of women's work across cultures and the impact of male-centric developmental plans and policies on the lives. Another leading figures in British social anthropology was Audrey Richards. He worked spanning over 50 years, covered areas like kinship, nutrition, fertility, labor and migration. An Africanist, she she conducted field work in the 1930s and 1950s in Uganda and Zambia. Her well-known study Land, Labor and Diet 1939 examines the manner in which the Bamba community managed scarce resources and the acute problems faced by Bamba women in doing contingency planning during periods of food shortage. Her most famous work, Chinsungu 1956, examines female initiations rites among the Bamba of Zambia and the various secret rituals and practices that signal their passage into adulthood and responsibility. Now we are going to discuss reflection. An interesting source of the influential writings identified by Levin 2006 is the work of the unsung heroines, the wives of anthropologists. Some of these women facilitated the work of their husbands, others created their own genre. Levin cites, among others, Elizabeth Fernia's 1965 work, Guest of the Sheikh, which was the result of her being with her anthropologist husband in the field of southern Iraq, helping him gather information about women. Similarly, Margery Wolf's classic ethnography, The House of Lim 1968, was written because she had accompanied her husband to northern Taiwan to conduct fieldwork. Some other highly influential use of life histories included Mary F. Swiss, Baba of Caro 1954, and Marjorie Shostak's Nisa, The Life and Words of a Kung Woman. Now we are further going to discuss. This section has highlighted the significant contribution of women anthropologists in bringing women's issues to scrutiny. However, barring some notable exceptions, the discipline of anthropology was overwhelmingly dominated by men. Ruth Benedict 1887 to 1948 and Margaret Mead 1901 to 1978 were two such figures who attracted widespread interest from academic and lay readers alike. Some of their works were indeed the first bestseller the discipline produced. Ruth Benedict was an ardent feminist who was also relatively open and frank about her sexual preferences. Margaret Mead was her close friend and shared some of her interests but did not draw on her personal and or political commitments to the same extent in her academic work. Their work drew upon comparisons between the United States and the non-Western world. They made their American readers aware of the vast differences that exist across cultures in appropriate male and female behavior, child rearing practices, and attitudes towards sexuality. Benedict's fieldwork with Native Americans and other groups led her to develop the configurational approach to culture, wherein culture is viewed as personality writ large, facilitating and constraining different personality types in different societies. Gender is a crucial dimension of personality and culture, and the enactment of gender roles is also culturally conditioned. Mead also examined the influence of culture on human social development. Her landmark work Coming of Age in Samoa 1928 and later Sex and Temperament in Three Primitive Societies 1935 demonstrate how culture is a primary factor in determining masculine and feminine characteristics and behavior. Coming of Age in Samoa created a sensation in the USA as it dwelt upon the very different manner in which young men and women in Samoa experience adolescence and adulthood as a consequence of their permissive and relaxed attitudes towards sexuality and intimacy. The works of Benedict and Mead focused upon the so called soft areas like child rearing practices and gender socialization and tended to be highly impressionistic in nature. This did not go down well with the British social anthropologists who were immersed in the study of hard areas like kinship and political organization. However, the visibility, popularity, and high academic stature attained by Benedict and Mead made it possible for women anthropologists to make their presence felt in the years to come. The next section will discuss the emergence of feminist anthropology as a distinctive development within the discipline and highlight some of the key texts and authors that made valuable contributions. The emergence of feminist anthropology. Feminist anthropology made its tentative beginning in the radical climate of Western universities in the 1970s with papers and panels offered by young scholars at conferences. Sally Slocum's 1970 paper, Women the Gatherer, the Male Bias in Anthropology, presented at the annual meet of the American Anthropological Association, was one such contribution which critiqued the popular conception of the man the hunter and virtually posed a challenge to the male dominated academy for its androcentric and simplistic biases regarding the roles of men and women and the evolutionary history of the species. 1970 also saw the publication of Peggy Goldie's edited volume Women in the Field. This path-breaking collection of essays by women anthropologists opened up the question of how being a woman affected the experiences of anthropologists conducting their research in diverse settings and periods. Two of the most significant volumes published during the 1970s, which virtually defined the field of feminist anthropology, were Women, Culture and Society 1974, edited by the Michael Gimbalist, Rosaldo, and Lucy Lamphere, and Toward an Anthropology of Women 1975, edited by Raina Reiter, later known as Raina Rapp. Rosaldo and Lamphere's volume was based upon the premise that relations between men and women were asymmetrical across cultures and societies. They write, everywhere we find that women are excluded from certain economic or political activities, that their roles of wives and mothers are associated with fewer power and prerogatives than are the roles of men. It seems fair to say that it seems fair to say then that all contemporary societies are to some extent male dominated, and although the degree and expression of female subordination vary greatly, sexual asymmetry is a universal fact of human social life. Rosaldo and Lamphere, 1974. A key observation was that women tend to be subordinated because of their confinement to the domestic or private domain. Men, on the other hand, dominate in the public domain and thus have great access and control over economic, political, and social resources. Sherry Ortner, highly influential piece, is female to male as nature is to culture. Look at symbolic construction of women as the key to understanding that secondary status. Sherry Ortner's highly influential piece is female to male as nature is to culture, looked at symbolic construction of women as the key to understanding their secondary status. Because women are connected with natural functions like pregnancy, lactation, and child rearing, they are seen on the lower plane than men who control the cultural realm. Culture is always viewed as superior to nature. Rihanna Writer's volume was also inspired by the emerging feminist movement and was a response to the movement's questions to anthropologists about women's inequality. Answer to these questions, Reiter hoped, would help feminists struggle to attain equality in its society. In her introduction, Reiter outlines the problem of male bias in anthropology. However, she challenges the concept of universal sexual asymmetry and cautions against the use of the anthropologist's own culture categories and dichotomies to generalize about other cultures. One of the most celebrated papers in the volume is Gail Rubin's The Traffic in Women Notes on the Political Economy of Sex. Rubin uses the work of theorists like Marx, Engels, Freud, Levi-Strauss to explicate what she terms the sex gender system, in which the biological category female is transformed into the socio-cultural category women, while sex is a biological or psychological given gender emerges when bodily characteristics are given cultural meanings and significance. It is the socially constructed and constituted. The publication of these two volumes signaled a virtual explosion in the field. There was a renewed interest in the work of Karl Marx collaborator Friedrich Engels. Engels' Origin of the Family, Private Property and the States, 1884, was recognized by the feminists as the foundational work. Socialist feminists analyzed the struggle of impoverished women across the world. The situation of women in Western capitalist societies was compared to that of women in societies with simpler economic and political systems and more egalitarian social structures. By placing women at the center of analysis, feminist anthropologists were able to arrive at very different results from these of traditional male centered studies. Annette Wiener's famous re-study of the Trobriand Islands, for example, in which she revisited the site of Malinowski's classic work and actually incorporated women's voices in her ethnography, showed us are different pictures of the Trobrianders than the one painted by him. To sum up, the period of the 1970s and 1980s saw the proliferation proliferation of debates over domestic and public and nature culture dichotomies, assuming universal sexual asymmetry and women as a universal category. A political goal of uniting women across nations and cultures under an overarching sisterhood was the hallmark of the feminist movement. Women, it was believed, should strive together to fight the common experience of discrimination. However, scholars also argued that these conceptions were Western ones, rooted in European and American history and culture. In other words, they were shaped and structured by specific socio-cultural context. Could these concepts be used uncritically in other cultures, in other cultural contexts, without distorting the understanding of gender relations in the other cultures? Would these concepts misrepresent different experiences and realities? This brings us to the dialectical or contradictory relationship between the discipline of anthropology and feminism. It has been described as an awkward relationship by the British anthropologist Strathern. Margaret Strathern. Henrietta Murray also raises the question of the ethnocentric bias of Western feminism, which does not adequately account for the local or folk conceptions of other cultures. The goal of anthropology are the study of other cultures and understanding local conceptions and worldviews from the point of view of the members of that culture. However, feminism specifies the commonly experienced discrimination and devaluation faced by women all over the world. Thus, while the disciplinary orientation of the anthropology emphasizes differences, variety and diversity of human experiences, cultural meanings and social structures, the orientation of feminism is to bring all women together under the single umbrella. This it is this essentializing and totalizing tendency in feminism that was critiqued and questioned by several scholars. They argued that the category of women that was discussed by feminists actually referred to white, Western, middle class women and failed to account for the diversities of race, ethnicity, caste, class, etc. Non Western social scientists have strongly criticized the ethnographic bias of Western feminist scholars in their studies and interpretations of other cultures. Some have also raised the issues of unequal structures of power which continue to dictate the research activities even in feminist anthropology. Those who are studied the mostly from those who are studied are mostly from other cultures, and those who study and write are mostly Western women. Abu Lughod, 1990. Even in the case of native anthropologists studying their own culture, the Western centric concept and theories of academic social sciences creates a hierarchy of knowledge between the scholar or researchers and the subject of the study. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, anthropologists of gender broadened their concern from women's experiences per se to the ways in which gender and other analytical categories, race, caste, class, ethnicity, etc., meet and interact under varying material and cultural conditions. For example, in Indian context, we can see quite clearly how difficult it is to separate gender, caste, and class, women's experience and degree of the marginalization, as they are structured by the intersection of these categories. Thus, we can speak of Dalit women as being thrice marginalized on account of their position in caste, class, and gender hierarchies.